Good morning, and thank you for joining me on the Path to Liberty. This is the Fast Friday edition of the show for December 18th, 2020. And looking back on history, it's pretty obvious, at least to me, that the founding generation fought a long, bloody war to free themselves from an empire, the largest government in the history of the world at that time. And we could say they're probably all rolling in their graves because the people today, and for many, many decades, they really have embraced the exact same kind of despotism that the founders and the old revolutionaries struggled to throw off. And that's what I'm going to be talking about on today's episode, along with some great insight from Richard Henry Lee, plus people like Fisher Ames, George Washington, James Madison, and Thomas Jefferson. But first of all, before getting to that, my name is Michael Bolden. We broadcast live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time from here in my home office and studio in downtown Los Angeles for the 10th Amendment Center. Our show homepage has everything you need to follow this program. All the platforms are on: video, live streaming, archive, audio-only podcast editions like Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Amazon, all the rest. You can find all those platforms, all the archives for 2.5 years. On individual episodes, I include plenty of reference links so you can read and learn more on your own time. Sometimes I cite other previous episodes. You can find those as well. And then, of course, you can also find our membership program where you can put your financial faith behind our work for as little as $2 a month, and we make it go a long, long way in support of the Constitution and liberty. That show homepage is 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. It's all spelled out, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. And I couldn't be more grateful for you spending some of your time with me today. Thank you so much for being here, whether it's your first time or you've been here for every single episode since day one. I couldn't be more grateful for you spending some of your time with me and listening to what I have to say about these important issues. But since it's Fast Friday, I promise to not take up too much of your time. Let's see if I can get this information out to you in the next 10 to 15 minutes. I want to first start out with a letter that I've cited probably a number of times. I'm just paraphrasing it. It's from Richard Henry Lee on October 5th, 1787. October 5th, 1787, to Samuel Adams. And he basically said that the people did not fight the British. He was talking about what I was mentioning in the opening. They didn't go through this long, bloody conflict with the British, only to be, quote, brought under despotic rule under the notion of strong government or in the form of elective despotism. They didn't throw off the chains of one empire to create another centralized, consolidated state with control over their lives, liberty, and property. That was Richard Henry Lee to Samuel Adams. In 1787, a similar statement was made by Fisher Ames in Congress on June 18th, I think it was, 1789. He said, "We are warned against betraying the liberties of our country. We are told that all powers tend to abuse." No one really disagreed with that. They all recognized that power would always seek to grow, and people with power were always liable to abuse them. "It is our duty," he said, "therefore, to keep them single and distinct," straightforward and very distinct. Who exercises which power? Which branch gets to do this? The federal government versus states. There has to be a very clear line in the sand, according to Fisher Ames and many others, Patrick Henry, George Mason, Samuel Adams, and the like. And he says, where the executive swallows up the legislature, it becomes a despotism. Pure and simple. When the executive branch also has the power to create law, it becomes a despotism. Where the legislature trenches upon the executive, though, it approaches towards despotism, bad all around. And George Washington talked about this. He called it the spirit of encroachment, where one branch or one individual tried to encroach on the powers delegated to another or reserved to the people of the several states. And he says the spirit of encroachment, this was in his farewell address of 1796, the spirit of encroachment tends to consolidate the powers of all the departments in one. Consolidate, centralize. So this idea that you're going to have a little bit extra to deal with this situation, a little bit extra power to deal with this situation, one branch over the other, it over time centralizes, consolidates the powers, and thus, he said, to create whatever the form of government, a real despotism. So that centralization of power, that spirit of encroachment is what we were warned against. And that's why the founders, whether they were for or against ratification, they all recognized this problem in human nature, this reality, this historical maxim. And that's why they wanted to keep those powers separate and distinct between the executive and legislative, and vice versa, the judiciary as well, and also between the federal government as a whole and the people of the several states. And no one really made it more clear on that latter version than James Madison, probably, in Federalist 45. This was in early 1788. He put it this way: the powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. Few and defined. Those which are to remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite. Again, he's talking about what eventually became the 10th Amendment, the idea or the doctrine or principle of delegated versus reserved powers. All powers which were not expressly delegated were retained by the people of the several states. He goes on further. Again, powers delegated to the federal government, few and defined. Those reserved to the state governments, numerous and indefinite, by the people who are actually doing the delegating. The former, he wrote, will be exercised principally on external objects as war, peace, negotiation, and foreign commerce, with which the last, the power of taxation, will for the most part be connected. But the powers, and but was mine, the powers reserved to the several states will extend to all objects which in the ordinary course of affairs concern the lives, liberties, and properties of the people and the internal order, improvement, and prosperity of the state. That was James Madison, Federalist 45. We know they eventually added the 10th Amendment to hammer this home. And Thomas Jefferson, Mike writes, referred to the 10th as the foundation, this is Mike Meharry, the foundation of the Constitution. He points out that Jefferson specifically called it that in his argument against the constitutionality of a national bank in 1791. And I can just read the 10th for you so you have it handy. The power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. And Meharry puts it this way: this tells us the federal government was meant to be very limited. I mean, in comparison to today, like almost non-existent. And that's why he put it this way: in fact, you should barely even know it exists. But if you fast forward a couple hundred years, or 232 years since Madison's Federalist 45, the government looks nothing like the one Madison described, or other people like James Wilson Mike points out. In fact, he says it looks exactly opposite. The federal government's powers are numerous and indefinite. Numerous and indefinite for the feds. Those are the ones that are supposed to be few and defined. Numerous and indefinite is supposed to be the state. So it's totally flipped on its head. It claims authority, Mike writes, over virtually every aspect of our lives, from dictating what kind of light bulbs we can screw into our fixtures to how much water can be flushed down our toilets. Meanwhile, the states have effectively been relegated to the role of a servant, left with very few powers at all. And although we recognize that politicians and bureaucrats, or whatever you want to call them, the deep state, they're all bad and always try to gain power, it also is the responsibility of the people to keep them in check, not to encourage these things. But unfortunately, so many people, left, right, and center, whenever there's a problem, they want a national solution to anything and everything. You've got people in California wanting to dictate how people in South Carolina live their lives, and vice versa. And really, it should be none of their damn business on most every single issue. As Madison put it, each state specifically would deal with the ordinary course of affairs concern the lives, liberties, and properties of the people and the internal order, improvement, and prosperity of the state. So each state, they should make their own determinations of whether they're going to be good or bad on one issue or another, and the other states need to butt out and stop calling on the federal government, who is more than willing, everyone in Washington, D.C. seems more than willing to try to enforce their political goals on people in whatever state it may be. Going further, Mike puts it this way: for all practical purposes, the federal government today operates without any limits at all. I mean, there are some, but they're mostly political, I would like to add. It's not that they don't claim the power to be able to monitor everything, to control how you can defend your home, your person, your property, what kind of plants you can grow, the light bulbs, the toilets, all the regulations, the healthcare, and on and on and on. It's almost endless. Everything, Mike writes, the federal government does and approves is considered, quote, constitutional. Basically, people sit around and say, well, if Congress passed it, I may disagree with it. I may think it's unconstitutional, but until the Supreme Court tells us it's unconstitutional, that's the supreme law of the land. And that is not how things are supposed to work. And Mike sums it up like this. Americans won the revolution, but they squandered the fruits of victory in a quest for government solutions to every problem. And it certainly wasn't as much at the time, not even close. But every precedent sets the foundation for another precedent, for another expansion of power. And as soon as you give them a foot in the door, you know that door is going to be wide open. Eventually you can drive a truck right through it. And that's basically what we have today. So Americans have squandered the fruits of that victory in a quest for government solutions to every problem. Instead, he writes, instead of a limited government committed to protecting basic rights like life, liberty, and property, we have an institution that attempts to control every aspect of our lives. We have become what our forefathers sought to destroy. It's not awesome information today, but it is factual, and I think it's important to really hammer this home. When you're living under the largest government in the history of the world, with trillions upon trillions upon trillions in debt that keeps growing and growing no matter which team is in charge in Washington, D.C., you are nowhere close to the vision of the founders and the ratifiers. And it's going to be up to we the people to learn how to exercise our rights, whether the government people want us to or not. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode. It was quick and straightforward, I think. I hope you learned something still. That's more important than anything. I hope you got something educational out of this. If you enjoy the show, you enjoy what we do at the TAC, you support our efforts to nullify all unconstitutional acts, to stand for the Constitution and liberty, you can help us spread the word for free. Smash the like button on any platform you watch or listen on. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts or other podcast platforms. Leave comments on places like YouTube, Facebook, and elsewhere. Retweet on Twitter. All those actions, anything that you can do, comments, shares, all that stuff, it tells the algorithm of the platform you watch or listen on to show the program to more people, especially podcast reviews. Thank you so much to everyone who's been doing these things. And as I mentioned at the outset, if you want to put your financial faith behind our work, we will make it go a long, long way in support of the Constitution and liberty, starting out just as little as $2 a month over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. Again, I really appreciate you spending a few minutes of your time with me today. I hope you enjoyed the show. I hope you have a great weekend, and I'll see you next week as we ramp up towards Christmas here on the path to liberty.